A kindergartner vanished after school, gone without a trace. 15 years later, her childhood backpack is found deep in a cave, unlocking secrets no one was ready for. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop in the comments below. Now let's get into the story. It was the kind of afternoon you could only find in a Colorado town like Millersfield. Soft golden sun hanging low behind the Rockies, cotton clouds drifting slow as Sunday prayers, and the gentle buzz of cicadas humming above the crunch of gravel under little feet. The children poured out of Maple Lane Elementary, their backpacks bouncing and lunchboxes swinging like pendulums of freedom. Among them, in a faded denim jumper with yellow daisies embroidered near the hem, was 5-year-old Emma Whitlow. She was the kind of child people remembered without meaning to: pale blonde hair in twin braids, a light-up unicorn on her sneakers, and that strange habit of turning her head sideways when she was deep in thought, as if listening to something only she could hear. It was September 14th, 2009, and the air still clung to the last warmth of summer. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Callahan, waved her off at 2:37 p.m., same as every other school day. Her walk home was just 5 blocks, a 10-minute route through safe, tree-lined streets, where the mailman knew her name and neighbors still left their doors unlocked. But that day, Emma never made it home. Somewhere between the red brick schoolhouse and the white front porch of 217 West Cedar Avenue, she simply vanished. By 3:10, Sarah Whitlow knew something was wrong. It wasn't just mother's intuition. It was the way the clock ticked too loudly, how the front window caught every shadow, but not the one she was waiting for. She called the school. No, Emma had left on time. She called Tom at the hardware store. He came rushing home, still in his red apron and smelling like sawdust. By 3:45, they were checking every yard, every driveway, every inch of sidewalk. By 4:10, they called the police. The first responders arrived with calm professionalism, assuring the Whitlows that most missing children were found within the first few hours. Probably wandered off, they said, maybe at a friend's house. But Sarah was firm. Emma didn't wander. She was shy, cautious, slow to warm up to strangers. She didn't have a phone, didn't know how to cross the bigger streets alone, and she was always home by 3 o'clock, never late. By sunset, the whole town had mobilized. Neighbors brought flashlights. Teenagers in soccer jerseys scoured the alleyways. The fire department brought out thermal cameras and dogs. Volunteers moved through the woods behind the school, calling her name until their voices cracked. Emma, Emma, honey, it's time to come home now. But the darkness came down like a curtain, and there was no Emma behind it. News vans rolled in by morning, the kind with satellite dishes and anxious anchors who try to look solemn between takes. They interviewed Sarah and Tom, captured the trembling in Sarah's hands, the redness in Tom's eyes. Flyers were printed, telephone poles covered. Social media lit up. Tips poured in. Sightings in Denver, a woman in a red car, someone who thought they saw a child by the old railroad tracks. Each one investigated. Each one led to nothing. The town's heart cracked with every passing day. Candlelight vigils were held. The principal cried during morning announcements. The mayor offered a reward. But the trail grew colder by the hour, and with it, hope began to thin like breath on a winter window. Detectives questioned everyone. Friends, teachers, crossing guards, even Tom's co-workers. One man, a local handyman with a record of petty theft, became a person of interest. He had worked on the school roof the week prior. People whispered his name in the grocery store. But nothing stuck. He passed a polygraph. His alibi checked out. And yet, in the minds of many, he remained guilty in spirit if not in law. Sarah and Tom began to crumble under the weight of grief. In the beginning, they barely slept. They would take turns sitting on the porch, watching the street like sentinels. Sarah kept Emma's bed made, her toys arranged just so. She refused to move the pink cup Emma drank from every morning. Tom tried to keep busy. He built a new shed. He repainted the living room. But eventually, the silence grew too heavy to outrun. Tom drank more. Sarah cried less, but felt it more. The marriage began to fray. By the next spring, they were sleeping in separate rooms. By the following year, separate homes. Still, Sarah never gave up completely. Every year on September 14th, she tied a balloon to the mailbox. Every birthday, she baked Emma's favorite cake, funfetti with pink frosting and too many sprinkles. She'd sit at the table and wait until the candles melted sideways, whispering wishes she no longer believed in. As the seasons turned, Millersfield moved on in small, quiet ways. New families moved into old homes. The school installed more security cameras. Children were no longer allowed to walk home alone. And somewhere, buried in the dusty files of cold cases and long-forgotten news stories, the name Emma Whitlow began to fade like chalk left in the rain. Until 15 years later, when a pink backpack, sun-bleached and dirt-stained, would be found beneath a pile of rocks in a cave deep in the Colorado wilderness. A backpack that would reignite an old sorrow, tear open old wounds, and bring back a story the town of Millersfield had almost let go. In the days and weeks that followed Emma Whitlow's disappearance, Millersfield began to change, not in ways visible to the casual eye, but deep in its bones. The town that once knew only ordinary rhythms, church bells, softball games, and summer fairs, suddenly learned to live with suspicion. Trust, once woven through its streets like garlands on a holiday float, unraveled thread by fragile thread. Porch lights that once clicked off at bedtime now burned through the night. Mothers who once waved from the front stoop now insisted on walking their children to school, clutching small hands with white-knuckled worry. The familiar path Emma took, the route of maple trees, garden fences, and the old mail carrier with the limp, had turned into a haunted trail that nobody wanted to name aloud. In those early days, everyone had a theory, and with each theory came a target. The handyman, a wiry man named Clive who had fixed a boiler at the school the week before, became a lightning rod. He lived alone in a run-down trailer on the edge of town and wore the same muddy boots every day. He'd never harmed anyone, but he was odd, and in a town without answers, odd was dangerous enough. The sheriff questioned him for hours, combed through his property, took samples of the dust from his truck bed. Nothing came of it. Still, some parents wouldn't let their kids ride bikes past his road again. Then there was the new couple on Alder Street, the ones who just moved in from out of state a month before Emma vanished. They didn't go to church, didn't show up to the first town hall meeting after the disappearance. That was enough for whispers. The rumors fed off grief and bred resentment. Even Tom Whitlow wasn't spared. Some said he'd lost his temper with Emma more than once. Others claimed he'd been having an affair and wanted to run away from it all. It was cruel nonsense, but that didn't stop it from spreading. Every house had a theory. Every kitchen table a judge and jury. Sarah bore it quietly. She stopped going to the grocery store, started sending her sister instead. Her face, once familiar in the PDA and bake sales, became a flickering image behind the curtains. People left casseroles on her porch for a while, then just cards, and then nothing. Grief, they discovered, made others uncomfortable when it outstayed the calendar's courtesy. Tom coped differently. At first, he was fire in motion, refusing to sit still. He helped in every search, organized new ones when the police began pulling back, canvassed the nearby highways with missing posters until the wind and rain stripped them bare. But as the weeks turned into months and the trail ran dry, the fire in him began to crackle and sputter. He started taking his lunch breaks at the Rusty Rail Tavern instead of coming home. By year's end, he'd moved into the back room of his friend Dale's cabin and left the house on Cedar Avenue to Sarah and silence. The space between them grew into a chasm neither could cross. They grieved differently. Sarah grew quiet, inward. She reread Emma's storybooks late at night and lined up her dolls each morning, just so. Tom raged at the sky, punched walls, and drank to forget what he couldn't. They still spoke sometimes, shared holidays in awkward silence, held hands during vigils. But the thread had frayed too far. Detectives, too, began to drift. The leads had dried up. Every report of a blonde-haired girl turned into dead ends. A woman in Denver thought she saw Emma at a laundromat. Turned out to be a cousin visiting from Nebraska. A trucker claimed to have seen a crying girl at a rest stop, but security footage proved otherwise. Even the so-called psychics offered only shadows and riddles. leading search parties into the woods with promises that fell apart underfoot. The last real search took place 9 months after Emma vanished. It was spring. The thaw had come, and with it a hope that maybe snow had hidden something, some clue or trace. Dozens of volunteers combed the forested outskirts of town. Sarah walked silently among them, wearing Emma's old backpack across her own shoulders like a shield. They found nothing, just deer tracks, empty bottles, a rusted tricycle someone swore wasn't their last fall. After that, things grew quiet. Emma's face still stared back from flyers at the gas station, but her name came up less and less. New children started school. The town went on, but there was an invisible scar across it, a kind of cautious sadness that never quite healed. Neighbors still nodded to one another, still hosted barbecues and holiday parades, but behind every smile was the unspoken ache. If a little girl could vanish in a town like this, what else might be taken? Even after their divorce, Sarah and Tom kept Emma's case alive in their own quiet ways. Sarah created a website, posting old photos, clinging to her ritual of baking on birthdays. Tom wrote letters to congressmen, called into radio shows, and kept a box in his trailer filled with maps, clippings, and coordinates, anything he thought might someday matter. And so it was year after year, until, in a summer 15 years removed from the day Emma disappeared, a teenager hiking in the mountains would stumble upon a child's pink backpack wedged in the mouth of a forgotten cave. A backpack that would turn Millersfield upside down once more and awaken the grief and hope the town had buried so deep it had almost forgotten how much it hurt. It was a hot July afternoon in 2024 when 17-year-old Caleb Monroe set out with his dog, Whiskey, for an impromptu hike up Jasper Ridge. The air was thick with pine and sun-baked stone, the kind of dry, humming heat that soaked through your shirt and made even the shadows feel warm. Jasper Ridge had always been more rumor than recreation for most of the folks in Millersfield. Too rocky, too steep, too easy to get lost in. But Caleb had a restless streak and a habit of wandering where others wouldn't. He was chasing solitude, not scenery, when he veered off the main trail in search of a cooler patch of shade and wound up standing at the mouth of a narrow crevice between two limestone outcroppings. Whiskey barked, tail stiff, nose quivering toward the dark. At first, Caleb thought maybe the dog had scented a rabbit or some old carcass caught in the shadows. But when he stooped and peered past the curtain of moss, he spotted something strange wedged between a rock and a thick root system. It was pink, dulled by time and grime, with a patch of faded glitter and one broken zipper hanging askew like a limp wing. Curious and a little uneasy, Caleb reached in, tugged the object free, and stepped back into the sunlight. What he held in his hands was a child's backpack, small, weather-worn, and unmistakably old. He turned it over. The bottom was caked in dried mud, the straps brittle and cracked. On one side was a cartoon unicorn, barely visible now, and on the inside flap, scribbled in the shaky handwriting of a kindergartner, were the words, Emma W. Caleb froze. The name clanged through his memory like a struck bell. Emma Whitlow. He didn't remember much. He'd only been 2 years old when she vanished, but her photo still hung near the post office, eyes wide and blue, framed in fading plastic. She was part of the town's legacy of sorrow, the story every kid heard growing up. Don't walk alone. Don't talk to strangers. Remember what happened to Emma. His first instinct was to think it wasn't real. A coincidence, maybe. Some other girl, some other lost bag. But deep down he knew. He could feel it in the back of his throat like a swallowed shout. He took photos with his phone, careful not to touch the backpack more than he already had, then called 911 with a voice that trembled even though he didn't know why. Within an hour, the trail was cordoned off. By nightfall, floodlights were hoisted, tents pitched, and agents from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation were picking through the cave with gloved hands and solemn faces. The discovery made headlines within a day, not just in Millersfield, but statewide. Backpack belonging to missing girl found in remote Colorado cave. That's how the Denver Post ran it. For those who had buried the memory of Emma under layers of time and heartbreak, the news struck like lightning in a dry forest. Old emotions surged up: shock, disbelief, hope wrapped in the barbed wire of fear. Was this just a piece of the past, washed up by chance? Or was it the key to a truth they'd long given up on uncovering? Sarah Whitlow learned about the backpack from a phone call at 6:43 p.m. She had just finished watering her geraniums when a deputy's voice came through the line, measured and hesitant. "Mrs. Whitlow, we've recovered something we believe belonged to your daughter." There was a long pause before he added, "It's her backpack, the one she was wearing when she disappeared." She dropped the hose and nearly fell to her knees. The world slowed down after that. Agents came to her home with photographs and forms, and when she asked to see the backpack in person, they explained it would need to be processed first for fingerprints, DNA, hair fibers, anything that could speak for the silence of 15 years. Still, they let her hold one of the photos a little longer. She traced the outline of a unicorn with her finger. "That's hers," she whispered. "She picked it out herself. Wouldn't let me choose any of the others." Tom was called soon after. He had been working under the hood of a '98 Ford Ranger when his phone rang. The mechanic shop's radio was on low, playing an old Springsteen tune, but he didn't even notice it cut off. His hands were black with oil, but he didn't bother wiping them before driving out to meet Sarah and the investigators. For the first time in years, they stood side by side, not as estranged parents or ghosts of themselves, but as two people clinging to the same fragile thread. The cave, it turned out, was far from any public trail, well beyond where any previous searches had reached. Officials called in forensic archaeologists, trained in the delicate process of examining long-sealed spaces. The interior was shallow but dry, protected from snow and erosion, with a few old animal bones in one corner and signs that small creatures had used it as shelter. But it was the backpack that mattered, and what they found inside. One item at a time, carefully removed and cataloged. A tiny plastic comb, still tangled with blonde hairs. A wrinkled note with a drawing of a house and stick figures, labeled Mommy, and a single mitten, light purple with a stitched heart. All unmistakably hers. All too perfectly preserved. Something had happened in that cave. Something real. And for the first time in 15 years, Millersfield had proof that Emma hadn't just vanished. She had been somewhere close, hidden, waiting. And whatever secrets still clung to that backpack were about to tear open the past. The discovery of Emma's backpack sparked a tidal wave of renewed attention on a case that had long been relegated to cold files and whispered recollections. The local police force, stretched thin and burdened by years of dead ends, welcomed the sudden surge of federal agents and forensic experts who poured into Millersfield. It was as if the town's heartbeat quickened with the hope that, at last, there might be answers after so many years of silence. But with that hope came a careful wariness. Everyone understood how fragile it was. The line between hope and heartbreak, so thin it could snap at the slightest touch. Sarah Whitlow found herself thrust back into a spotlight she had fled years ago. Reporters knocked on her door, their questions gentle but relentless, their cameras casting her grief in harsh relief. She answered carefully, every word measured, every memory a shard of pain she didn't want to share but couldn't keep inside. Her days became a blur of interviews, meetings with detectives, and restless nights haunted by the echo of a child's laughter she hadn't heard in a decade and a half. Tom Whitlow was different. The years away from the public, I had carved lines of weariness into his face, but the fire that had once dimmed in him rekindled like a slow-burning coal. He pored over old case files, revisited search maps, and met with investigators to piece together a timeline that had long been frayed and incomplete. He insisted on being part of every discussion, every decision, determined not to be sidelined this time. The loss had shaped his life, but now it propelled him forward with a fierce determination he hadn't known he still had. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing with them resources and technology that the small-town police could never muster. Specialists in cold cases, forensic science, and digital mapping arrived, combing through every detail. Old witness statements, forgotten tips, and the physical evidence newly unearthed. They focused on the cave itself, analyzing the soil, the air quality, and any trace that might reveal how long Emma's backpack had been there and what it might say about her last hours. Among the items found in the backpack, forensic teams detected faint traces of soil consistent with the cave's interior, alongside fibers that didn't match anything from the known environment. It hinted at something or someone else. A chilling thought gripped the investigators. Emma might not have been alone. The townspeople felt the surge of activity like a distant storm on the horizon. Some welcomed it as a long-awaited chance at closure. Others feared it would open wounds too raw to heal, dredging up grief they had tucked away under layers of time and silence. A community meeting was held in the old Millersfield High Gymnasium, where Sarah and Tom sat side by side, their presence a silent testament to the shared pain and unspoken hopes of everyone gathered. At the meeting, old friends and neighbors exchanged hushed conversations. The town was changing again, this time under the weight of questions rather than answers. Some parents looked at their children with new wariness. Others prayed for a miracle that would finally bring Emma home. Sarah spoke briefly, her voice steady but fragile, thanking everyone for their continued support and urging patience as the investigation unfolded. Tom added a few words about the importance of vigilance and community solidarity, reminding them that even after 15 years, hope could still burn bright. The renewed investigation uncovered new leads. A witness from the original case, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins, who had lived near the cave at the time, came forward with a recollection that had never seemed important before. He described seeing a suspicious vehicle, an old green pickup truck, parked near the ridge on the afternoon Emma disappeared. The vehicle was distinctive because of a dent on its passenger door and a missing hubcap. Police records showed that no such vehicle had ever been linked to the initial investigation. The description sparked a search for anyone matching the vehicle's profile in the years since. Meanwhile, the forensic team continued to analyze the backpack and its contents. They discovered traces of an unknown substance on the zipper, a faint, almost imperceptible chemical that led them to suspect that Emma might have been in contact with someone who worked with industrial materials. It was a detail that added layers of complexity and dread, raising new questions about who might have been involved and why Emma was left in the cave. Sarah struggled with these developments. Each piece of new information reopened the wound of her loss, but also gave her something to hold on to, a fragile thread leading somewhere, anywhere. She kept a journal during this time, writing down memories, feelings, and fragments of hope. It was a way to stay grounded amid the swirling storm of media attention and investigative activity. Some nights, she found herself staring at Emma's old photographs, tracing the smile frozen in time, wondering if her daughter had felt scared or alone in that cave, if she had hoped someone would find her. Tom, too, faced his own battles. The resurgence of the case forced him to confront the years of guilt and anger he had buried deep inside. He sought therapy, something he had never done before, and joined a support group for parents of missing children. There, in the quiet sharing of grief and hope, he found a new kind of strength, a reminder that while the past could not be changed, the future still held possibility. As the weeks passed, the investigation took a sudden turn. Forensic evidence collected from the cave revealed a partial fingerprint on the inside flap of the backpack. It was degraded but still viable enough for analysis. When run through national databases, it came back with no matches, no known criminals, no suspects. But the fingerprint suggested a presence, a touch that tied someone to Emma's last known possession. The renewed investigation reminded the town that some stories don't end quietly. Emma's disappearance was no longer just a chapter in Millersfield's history. It was a living, breathing mystery, unfolding again in the present. And as the search for answers deepened, so did the collective yearning for closure, whether through reunion, justice, or the peace that only truth can bring. The fingerprint discovery sent ripples through the investigation team, reigniting hopes and fears in equal measure. The fact that it didn't match any known criminal record deepened the mystery. Who had touched Emma's backpack all those years ago, and what had happened in the cave? The investigators soon realized they were not just chasing a name, but the shadow of someone who had slipped under the radar, someone who had vanished from the official story. The unknown fingerprint became a symbol of the gaps in memory, of lives interrupted and truths withheld. Sarah and Tom found themselves swept into an exhausting cycle of interviews, surveillance footage reviews, and old acquaintances' testimonies. Each day brought new fragments of a story no one fully understood, pieces that sometimes fit awkwardly, sometimes revealed more questions than answers. The media attention intensified as well, with stories speculating about possible suspects, motives, and even conspiracy theories. Sarah felt torn between the desire to shield her family from this storm and the need to push for answers she feared might never come. One afternoon, as the investigation pressed forward, a detective approached Tom with a file pulled from dusty archives. It contained a report from the day Emma disappeared, a vague but unsettling account from a woman who had seen a man loitering near the school bus stop, described as middle-aged, unremarkable, but somehow lingering too long, watching the children. The witness's description was sketchy and inconsistent, but it was one of the few leads from back then that had never been thoroughly pursued. Now, with new urgency, detectives began tracing the man's identity. Tom felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The idea that someone had been watching Emma, waiting, haunted him in the quiet moments. Had they seen the shadow then and missed it? Had they failed Emma all along? Every detail seemed to reopen old wounds, but he forced himself to confront these fears. He met with Sarah each evening, sharing every update, every lead, every frustration. Their grief had changed shape. It was no longer just loss, but the desperate desire for justice. Meanwhile, forensic teams analyzed other items found inside the backpack. Among them was a small, crumpled piece of paper, partially torn, with faint pencil marks. A forensic document examiner was called in to enhance the image, revealing what looked like a child's scribble, letters and shapes that might have been an attempt at writing. The possibility that Emma had been trying to communicate something, even in those last moments, electrified the investigation. The letters were too faint and fragmented to form words, but suggested a story waiting to be uncovered. The renewed scrutiny also unearthed past tensions in the town. Old rivalries and secrets surfaced as some residents felt the investigation dredged up painful memories best left buried. Sarah and Tom became reluctant figures in a community divided between hope for answers and the fear of reopening wounds. Yet, their courage inspired others to speak up, to revisit their own memories, to search for overlooked clues. One evening, Tom sat with his wife on the porch of their small house, the sun setting behind distant hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. They talked quietly about what they had learned, what they feared, and what they hoped for. Sarah's voice was steady but tinged with exhaustion. Maybe we'll never find Emma alive, but at least we can bring her home in some way. Tom nodded, gripping her hand tightly. We owe her that much and more. In the background, the town of Millersfield continued to hold its collective breath, watching as the threads of a 15-year-old mystery slowly unraveled. The backpack in the cave was more than just an artifact. It was a beacon, drawing attention back to a case frozen in time, but alive with questions. Each new discovery was a step toward truth, no matter how painful. As investigators chased shadows and sifted through fading memories, the Whitlows braced themselves for the truths waiting to emerge, truths that would test their strength, their faith, and their hope. The investigation took a turn that neither Sarah nor Tom had anticipated. Late one rainy evening, a call came through to the police station. A man claiming to hold information about Emma's disappearance had come forward. The man was nervous, his voice low and trembling, but his words carried a weight that the detectives couldn't ignore. He said he'd been a teenager when Emma vanished, someone who had lived on the outskirts of Millersfield, aware of things the rest of the town never saw. His story hinted at shadows lurking just beneath the surface, secrets that had been kept silent for years, out of fear and shame. Sarah and Tom listened in stunned silence as the man recounted a glimpse of a hidden world, a world where adults sometimes made choices that no child should witness. He spoke of a group of men who gathered near the woods behind the school, men with dark reputations, men who had left the town years ago, but whose presence still cast a shadow. His voice cracked as he described the afternoon Emma disappeared, how he saw her walking alone near the edge of the woods, and how a green pickup truck had followed her out of sight. The description matched the vehicle from Mr. Jenkins's testimony, linking these fragments into a chilling picture. The detectives sprang into action, piecing together the man's story with the physical evidence. They traced old records, searched for men who matched the descriptions, and interviewed others who might have seen or heard something over the years. It was painstaking work, each step forward met with a wall of silence or faded memories. But the trail was alive now, pulsing with a desperate urgency to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of time. Sarah felt the weight of it all settle heavier on her heart. For 15 years, she had clung to memories and prayers, but now reality pressed in. The harsh reality that her daughter might have been caught in something far darker than a simple disappearance. Yet, within that darkness, Sarah found a flicker of determination. She refused to let Emma's story be swallowed by silence. Every waking moment, she relived those last days, trying to make sense of the impossible. Tom threw himself into the community, organizing search parties around the wooded areas and the cave system. Volunteers joined in, fueled by a mix of hope and sorrow, their flashlights cutting through the dense underbrush as they retraced paths that had been long forgotten. The townspeople, many of whom had once turned away from the pain, now came together with a shared resolve to find answers and to heal. In one of those moments, deep in the woods near the cave, a volunteer stumbled across a small, weathered locket half buried beneath a mossy log. Inside was a faded photograph of a smiling young girl, not Emma, but someone close. The discovery sent ripples through the group and became a symbol of the past reaching out, demanding recognition. The locket was sent to forensic experts, who hoped it might provide a connection to the broader mystery. Back at the Whitlow home, nights grew long and quiet. Sarah kept Emma's room exactly as it had been 15 years ago. The little bedspread, the stuffed animals, the drawings taped to the walls. She often sat there, clutching a worn teddy bear that had been Emma's favorite. Tears came unbidden, but so did a fierce resolve. She whispered promises into the dark, promises that no matter what the investigation uncovered, Emma would not be forgotten. Tom, too, found solace in memories. He would sometimes sit outside on the porch, watching the stars blink awake one by one, thinking about the times he had held Emma close, about her bright eyes and boundless curiosity. The pain of loss was sharp, but beneath it lay a well of love that nothing could extinguish. It was this love that propelled him forward, that kept him standing when exhaustion threatened to pull him under. As the investigation unfolded, the town of Millersfield watched and waited, caught between hope and despair. The years had passed, but the scars remained, scars on the hearts of parents, on the walls of homes, on the very soil where Emma had once played. Now those scars were being exposed again, raw and vulnerable, demanding healing and understanding. The renewed search brought new voices, too. Other families who had suffered loss reached out to Sarah and Tom, sharing their stories and lending support. It became clear that Emma's disappearance was not just one family's tragedy, but part of a larger pattern, a reminder of the fragile innocence of childhood and the terrible things that could threaten it. One evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, her phone rang. It was the detective leading the investigation. "We found something," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of months of searching. "A new witness has come forward, someone who might have seen Emma after she disappeared." Sarah's heart pounded, a mix of hope and fear swirling inside her. Tom joined her, and together they listened, holding on to the fragile thread of possibility that had been woven through years of darkness. This new witness's story added another piece to the puzzle. She was a woman who had recently moved back to Millersfield, carrying memories she had buried deep. She described seeing a child matching Emma's description near a remote farmhouse on the edge of town days after the disappearance. The child had been with a man, someone she didn't recognize, but who had a reputation for secrecy and menace. The revelation opened a new front in the investigation, one that demanded courage, persistence, and a hope that truth would finally come to light. Sarah and Tom knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges they could not yet imagine. But as the town rallied, as new clues emerged, and as memories were reclaimed, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. Emma's story was no longer just a memory. It was a beacon calling them forward through the darkness, toward answers, toward justice, and toward the healing that every parent yearns for. The lead about the remote farmhouse near Millersfield breathed new life into the investigation and into Sarah and Tom's weary hearts. That farmhouse, long abandoned on the edge of town, had a reputation that made local children steer clear. Whispered stories of strange noises, locked doors, and a man who once lived there but had disappeared without a trace. Now, it became a focal point of desperate hope. The woman's eyewitness account, describing a child matching Emma's at that farmhouse, was both a glimmer of possibility and a chilling reminder of the danger that might have awaited their daughter. Detectives and volunteers organized a careful search of the property. As the sun rose over the misty fields, search teams moved quietly, their boots crunching on gravel, flashlights piercing shadows. The farmhouse was worn and decrepit, its peeling paint and boarded windows whispering secrets of forgotten years. Inside, dust motes floated through broken panes of glass, and the scent of damp wood hung heavy in the air. It was a place where time seemed to have stopped, but memories and echoes clung stubbornly to every corner. Sarah and Tom stood outside, hands intertwined, their hearts pounding as they faced the building that might hold answers, or reveal truths too painful to bear. The thought of Emma there, frightened and alone, sent shivers through them. But they knew they had to be strong, for her and for themselves. The community's support buoyed them, a steady wave of compassion and determination carrying them forward. Inside the farmhouse, detectives uncovered signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dirt floor, discarded wrappers, and a faded child's drawing taped to a cracked wall stirred both hope and heartbreak. The drawing, crudely made but unmistakable, bore the bright colors of a child's imagination. A sun, a house, a figure that could only be a small girl holding hands with someone taller. The discovery sent a surge of emotion through everyone present. It was a stark reminder that Emma's presence had once filled these rooms, that her story was not forgotten. The search turned to the surrounding woods and fields, where hidden trails and overgrown paths wound through dense underbrush. Volunteers combed every inch, calling Emma's name, listening for any sign of the past stirring to life. The wilderness seemed both beautiful and menacing, holding secrets beneath its green canopy that had remained hidden for years. For Sarah and Tom, it was a journey into the unknown, a search not just for answers but for closure. As days passed, new leads emerged. A neighbor recalled a man who had recently been seen near the farmhouse, someone matching the description given by the new witness. Police worked quickly to locate and question him. The man, defensive and elusive, denied any involvement with Emma's disappearance. But inconsistencies in his story and evidence placing him near the cave and the bus stop deepened suspicion. Sarah found herself reliving the terror of that afternoon, trying to piece together fragments of memory and new information. Every detail seemed vital. The green pickup truck, the stranger near the bus stop, the shadowy figures in the woods. She spoke often with the detectives, offering insights from her own search and the stories the community shared. Her grief had transformed into a fierce determination to see justice done, no matter the cost. Tom, meanwhile, threw himself into organizing community support. Fundraisers, awareness campaigns, and memorials kept Emma's memory alive and brought people together in shared purpose. Millersfield was no longer just a quiet town. It had become a symbol of resilience and hope amid tragedy. Tom's speeches, humble but heartfelt, resonated with everyone who had suffered loss or fear. He reminded them that the search for truth was also a search for healing. One evening, as the investigation pressed on, Sarah received a letter, anonymous and unmarked. Inside was a small, crumpled photograph of a little girl standing near the cave entrance, clutching a familiar backpack. The image was grainy but unmistakable. The handwriting on the back simply said, "She remembers." The letter sent a chill through Sarah's body, a strange mixture of hope and dread. Someone out there knew more than they were saying. Someone who had watched, waited, or perhaps even regretted. The discovery of the letter intensified the urgency. Detectives redoubled efforts to find its sender. Sarah and Tom wondered if it was a plea, a confession, or a cruel trick. But above all, it was a sign that Emma's story was far from over, that the past, long buried beneath layers of silence, was breaking through into the present. The nights grew colder as autumn deepened, but inside the Whitlow home, warmth and determination burned bright. Sarah found comfort in small routines, lighting candles in Emma's room, reading old letters, and holding on to memories that time could not erase. Tom joined her, their shared grief forging an unbreakable bond. Together, they faced the uncertain path ahead, strengthened by love and the promise of truth. In the weeks that followed, the search continued, bringing both breakthroughs and setbacks. The farmhouse yielded more clues: a worn shoe, a faded scarf, fragments of a toy, each discovery stirring a mixture of hope and sorrow. The townspeople rallied, their collective efforts weaving a tapestry of care and remembrance. Millersfield was no longer just a place marked by tragedy. It was a community united by the strength of those who refused to forget. And through it all, Sarah and Tom held on to the flickering light of hope. Hope that someday, somehow, they would find Emma, or at least find peace in the answers they sought. The journey was far from over, but the love that had sustained them through 15 long years remained unshaken, a beacon guiding them through the darkness. Weeks of painstaking investigation stretched into months, the lines between hope and despair blurring for Sarah and Tom. Then, just as the chill of early winter settled over Millersfield, a breakthrough shattered the long silence. Detectives uncovered a hidden compartment in the farmhouse's cellar, a small, dark space concealed behind a false wall. Inside lay a box covered in dust, containing items that pulled the past sharply into the present. There was Emma's faded kindergarten backpack, its fabric worn and stained, but unmistakably hers. Alongside it lay a collection of photographs, a torn notebook, and a small locket engraved with a heart. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Sarah and Tom arrived at the scene, their breath catching as they saw the backpack, a tangible piece of Emma's childhood, kept hidden for years in the shadowed cellar. For them, it was both a symbol of loss and a spark of hope. The photographs inside revealed haunting glimpses of a life no one had imagined. Pictures of Emma with a woman unknown to Sarah in places that seemed both familiar and distant. The torn notebook was filled with shaky handwriting, snippets of words and drawings that hinted at fear and confusion. Detectives worked tirelessly to analyze the evidence. The locket, they learned, had belonged to a woman who once lived in Millersfield but had vanished shortly after Emma's disappearance. That connection deepened the mystery. Was this woman the same one seen with Emma near the farmhouse? Had she been protecting the child or hiding a darker secret? Sarah pored over every photograph and page of the notebook, searching for answers hidden in the faded ink and captured moments. Each image felt like a message from the past, a plea to understand what had happened. The fear in Emma's eyes in some photos was unmistakable, a silent cry that echoed across time. Yet there were also glimpses of laughter and light, moments when Emma's spirit shone through the shadows. Tom stood steadfast beside Sarah, offering quiet support as they navigated the storm of emotions. He knew that the truth could be painful, but also that it was necessary for healing. The couple leaned on each other, their bond forged stronger through years of uncertainty and love. They shared memories of Emma, her favorite songs, her laughter, the way she loved the world around her, and held those memories close as they faced the unknown. Meanwhile, detectives followed up on new leads uncovered by the notebook and photographs. They tracked down people who had known the missing woman, piecing together her story. She had been a troubled soul, caught in a web of hardship and danger. Some whispered that she had tried to protect Emma, shielding her from threats that no child should face. Others suggested darker possibilities, that she was involved in events that led to Emma's disappearance. The tension in the town grew palpable as whispers turned to conversations and old wounds reopened. Millersfield was forced to confront a painful chapter in its history, one that many had hoped to leave behind. Yet within that pain was a collective determination, a desire to uncover the truth, to bring justice, and to honor the memory of a little girl who had vanished without a trace. Sarah and Tom became the heart of that movement. They spoke at town meetings, sharing their story and encouraging others to come forward with any information, no matter how small. Their courage inspired many, and slowly, walls of silence began to crumble. People who had once looked away started to speak, memories long buried resurfacing like fragile blossoms after a harsh winter. One evening, as Sarah sat alone with the photograph spread before her, her phone rang. It was a detective with news that made her heart leap and then falter. "We've identified a man connected to the farmhouse, someone with a history of violence and disappearance. We wanted to come in and look at some photos." Sarah agreed, her hands trembling with a mix of hope and fear. At the police station, she was shown images of a man whose face was grim and weathered, eyes cold yet haunted. He had lived near the farmhouse years ago and had vanished around the time Emma disappeared. His name was Robert Haynes, a recluse with a troubled past, suspected of numerous crimes but never caught. The thought that he might have known Emma, or worse, frightened Sarah deeply. Yet she felt a strange relief, a tangible suspect, a path to follow. Detectives intensified their efforts to find Haynes, scouring abandoned properties and questioning anyone who might know his whereabouts. The search grew urgent, a race against time fueled by the hope that answers might finally come. Sarah and Tom prepared themselves for what might lie ahead, a confrontation with a man who could hold the key to their daughter's fate. At home, Sarah found herself haunted by nightmares and memories. She clung to Tom, drawing strength from their shared love and the fragile hope that had blossomed amidst years of sorrow. Each day was a delicate balance between pain and determination, but they refused to surrender to despair. As winter deepened, the town held its breath, waiting for news. The discovery in the farmhouse cellar had changed everything. It had turned the tide of the investigation and reignited a community's hope. Sarah and Tom knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in 15 years, they felt the promise of light breaking through the darkness. The days that followed the identification of Robert Haynes were a tense blur for Sarah and Tom. The shadows of uncertainty lengthened around them, but beneath the weight of fear lay a fierce determination. Finally, there was a path forward. The police intensified their search, fueled by the hope that Haynes could provide the answers that had eluded everyone for 15 years. Sarah spent hours pacing their living room, her mind spinning with fragments of hope and dread. What if this man truly held the key to Emma's disappearance? What if confronting him brought more pain than relief? Yet she clung to the fragile thread of possibility, something they had been starved of for so long. One cold morning, as frost coated the streets of Millersfield, Sarah received a call from the lead detective. Haynes had been located in a run-down cabin miles outside town, living in near total isolation. The police were preparing to bring him in for questioning, and Sarah was asked if she wanted to be present. She hesitated, the weight of 15 years pressing down on her, but Tom's quiet encouragement steadied her resolve. Together, they agreed to face whatever truth awaited. At the station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The detectives prepared the room, carefully documenting every detail. When Robert Haynes entered, his presence filled the room like a dark cloud. His eyes, cold and unyielding, met Sarah's briefly, but she refused to show the torrent of emotions roiling inside her. Years of imagining this moment had left her both numb and raw. Haynes was older now, his face marked by time and hardship, but the menace beneath his exterior remained unmistakable. The questioning began slowly, with detectives probing for any connection between Haynes and Emma. At first, he was evasive, denying any knowledge or involvement. His voice was low and controlled, masking the turmoil beneath. But as the hours passed, the walls he'd built began to crumble. Under persistent questioning, fragments of his story emerged, a tale tangled with secrets, guilt, and regret. He admitted to knowing the woman seen with Emma near the farmhouse, a troubled woman named Marlene who had taken Emma in after the disappearance. Haynes described Marlene as volatile but fiercely protective, living on the fringes of society to shield Emma from unseen dangers. Sarah listened, heart pounding, as details spilled out, Marlene's desperate attempts to keep Emma safe from a shadowy figure who had threatened the child's life. The man Haynes hinted at was never named directly, but the implication was clear. Emma had been caught in a web far darker than a simple disappearance. Marlene had hidden Emma away in the farmhouse cellar, the very place where the backpack and photographs had been found. But something had gone terribly wrong. Marlene's sudden disappearance, followed by Haynes' retreat into isolation, suggested a tragedy concealed beneath layers of fear and silence. The conversation grew more intense as detectives pressed for specifics. Haynes revealed that Marlene had confided in him about plans to leave Millersfield with Emma, seeking safety far away. But before they could escape, Marlene vanished. Haynes believed she had been taken, or worse. His voice cracked as he spoke of the guilt that haunted him, the failure to protect a child who had become like family. For Sarah and Tom, the revelations were both a relief and a new agony, filling in gaps but opening wounds too deep for words. After hours of testimony, the interrogation ended, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Sarah and Tom stepped outside, the cold air sharp against their skin. The weight of what they had learned pressed down, but beneath it lay a flicker of hope. Emma had not been forgotten. She had been hidden, protected, and feared for. The pieces of the past were slowly assembling into a clearer picture, but the final chapters remained unwritten. Back home, Sarah found solace in sharing the day's events with Tom. They sat together in the quiet living room, memories and emotions swirling between them like a fragile flame. The confrontation with Haynes had unlocked truths long buried, but it also raised new questions. Where was Marlene? What had happened to Emma after she was hidden in that cellar? And most heartbreakingly, was Emma still alive? The community, too, reacted with a mixture of shock and cautious optimism. The man who had haunted their nightmares was now in custody, and the story that had haunted Millersfield for so long was finally coming into the light. Support poured in for Sarah and Tom, with neighbors offering help, prayers, and a renewed sense of solidarity. The town was healing, piece by piece, through shared grief and collective hope. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation expanded. Authorities searched every lead connected to Marlene's disappearance, scouring nearby towns and cities for any trace. For Sarah and Tom, each day was a balance of fear and faith. They clung to memories of Emma's bright smile and innocent laughter, using love as a shield against despair. Their home became a sanctuary of hope, walls lined with photographs, keepsakes, and a lingering presence of a daughter who had changed their lives forever. Late one night, as Sarah sat by the window watching snowflakes drift quietly to the ground, her phone rang. It was the detective with news that sent a shock through her body. A camper had been found abandoned near the state border. Inside, belongings belonging to Marlene. The discovery suggested she had been alive longer than anyone had imagined. More importantly, it hinted that Emma might still be out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Sarah's heart raced, tears blurring her vision. The road ahead remained uncertain and fraught with pain, but for the first time in years, a sliver of light pierced the darkness. The past was no longer a closed book, but a story still being written. A story of loss, love, and the unyielding hope that had carried a family through 15 long years. The discovery of Marlene's abandoned camper near the state border set off a flurry of renewed activity in the investigation. For Sarah and Tom, it was a bittersweet moment, a fresh glimmer of hope tempered by the long shadow of uncertainty. The camper was a silent witness to a story that stretched far beyond Millersfield's borders, a story woven with mystery, fear, and the desperate will to survive. Detectives quickly descended on the site, combing through every inch of the vehicle for clues that might lead them to Marlene and, hopefully, to Emma. Inside the camper, dust and decay mingled with the faded remnants of a life abruptly left behind. There were signs of hurried departure: a half-eaten meal, a stack of letters tied with a ribbon, and a small, worn stuffed animal, one Sarah recognized instantly as Emma's favorite toy. The sight tightened Sarah's chest, and she fought back tears, feeling as if a part of her daughter had been there, just waiting to be found. Tom held her hand firmly, anchoring her to the present as memories flooded their minds. The letters, painstakingly analyzed by the detectives, told a fragmented tale of flight and fear. Marlene had written of being pursued, of threats that grew more dangerous with each passing day. Her words were filled with a mixture of dread and fierce love. A mother figure desperate to protect a child caught in a storm she could not control. Sarah read each letter with trembling hands, feeling the urgency in Marlene's voice, the weight of responsibility she had carried in silence. News of the camper's discovery rippled through Millersfield, reigniting the community's involvement. Volunteers joined search parties that expanded across state lines, scouring forests, abandoned cabins, and forgotten trails. Sarah and Tom participated whenever possible, their determination fueled by a mixture of grief and hope. The town rallied around them, bound by a shared commitment to uncover the truth and bring Emma home. Meanwhile, detectives followed up on new leads from the letters and items found in the camper. Phone records revealed calls to distant relatives and unknown contacts, each connection offering a thread to pull in the tangled web of Emma's disappearance. The investigation stretched into neighboring counties, reaching law enforcement agencies unfamiliar with Millersfield but determined to help. Sarah and Tom found themselves drawn into the heart of the search in ways they had never imagined. Their lives, once consumed by silence and waiting, now moved at a relentless pace. Every phone call, every report carried the weight of possibility. They clung to the hope that Emma was still alive, somewhere beyond their reach, but not beyond their love. Despite the urgency, the search was marked by moments of exhaustion and doubt. Cold nights, empty leads, and the absence of concrete answers threatened to erode their resolve. Yet Sarah and Tom found strength in each other and in the growing network of support. Friends and neighbors brought meals, offered words of comfort, and shared memories of Emma, keeping her spirit alive in the hearts of many. One afternoon, as the search teams combed through a dense wooded area near the border, a call came in. A hiker had found something unusual lodged between rocks near a creek. It was a small bundle wrapped in cloth, worn but intact. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigators. Could this be the key to unlocking the final mystery? As forensic experts carefully examined the bundle, Sarah waited anxiously with Tom by her side. The town seemed to hold its collective breath, suspended in a fragile moment between hope and fear. Then the truth was revealed. Inside were more of Emma's belongings, clothes from her childhood, a locket engraved with her initials, and a photograph showing a young girl with bright eyes and a cautious smile. The items confirmed what Sarah and Tom had long dreamed. Emma had been near this place, alive, and cared for by someone who had fought to protect her. The discovery expanded the search area and renewed determination, but also deepened the mystery of how and why Emma had been hidden so far from home. Sarah spent long nights piecing together the new evidence, talking with detectives, and revisiting the memories that had shaped her life since Emma's disappearance. Each piece of the puzzle brought both answers and questions, painting a picture of resilience and pain. The years of silence had not erased the love that bound them. If anything, it had made that love fiercer, more urgent. The community's hope was reignited, but Sarah and Tom remained cautious. They had learned that hope could be fragile, easily shattered by the cruel twists of fate. Still, they refused to give up. Every lead, every clue was a step closer to the truth, a truth that would finally give Emma a voice, a place in the world that had long forgotten her. As winter gave way to the first hints of spring, the search continued with renewed vigor. Sarah and Tom faced the days with a mixture of sorrow and courage, guided by the belief that love could transcend time and distance. The past and present converged in a story still unfolding, a story of a little girl lost and a family fighting to bring her home. The days following the discovery of Emma's belongings near the creek were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. For Sarah and Tom, the new evidence was a fragile thread of hope, fragile but undeniable. They continued to navigate the tides of fear and anticipation, clinging to the possibility that Emma might still be alive, waiting for her story to be told. But then, something unexpected happened. A visit from a stranger who claimed to know more about Emma's disappearance, someone whose story would both complicate and deepen the search. The stranger arrived quietly in Millersfield, a man named Henry Carter, worn by years but with eyes that held a sharp clarity. He sought out the local sheriff's office, requesting to speak with the lead detective. When Sarah heard his name mentioned, her heart skipped, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension swirling inside her. She and Tom were invited to meet him to listen to the account he insisted was important. In the small, dimly lit room at the sheriff's station, Henry's voice was steady but heavy with the weight of untold truths. He revealed that years ago, before Emma disappeared, he had been involved with Marlene in a community of people living on the margins, a group that helped those fleeing danger, often in secret. Henry claimed he had helped move Marlene and Emma several times, to places where they could hide without being found. His story painted a picture of a hidden world, one that operated in the shadows of society's view, offering refuge, but also exposing those within it to peril. Sarah listened intently as Henry described the dangers that Marlene and Emma faced. Threats from a man obsessed with reclaiming control, whose presence haunted their every step. According to Henry, this man was the reason Marlene went underground, moving from place to keep Emma safe. The community that helped them was tight-knit but wary of outsiders, and Henry's involvement had ended abruptly when fear escalated and secrets deepened. As Henry spoke, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration. His account confirmed much of what they had already pieced together, but it also revealed new layers of complexity. This hidden network, the constant movement, the fear, these were parts of life Emma had lived that Sarah had never imagined. The realization that Emma had been protected by strangers added a bittersweet dimension to their search. She was not alone, yet the isolation had been profound. Tom, always the quiet strength beside Sarah, asked Henry about the last time he had seen Marlene and Emma. Henry's eyes darkened. It had been nearly a decade ago, he said, when Marlene disappeared without a trace. He feared that whatever had forced her to vanish might have caught up with her. This revelation deepened the sorrow, but also sharpened their resolve. Finding Emma was no longer just a search. It was a rescue from a shadowed past. The sheriff's office began to coordinate with Henry, using his knowledge to reach out to contacts in other states and communities where Marlene might have fled. The search widened beyond Millersfield and the surrounding counties, extending into regions known for harboring those living off the grid. It was a daunting task, but every lead was followed with meticulous care. In the days that followed, Sarah and Tom found themselves grappling with the enormity of what they had learned. Emma's story was no longer one of simple disappearance, but a complicated tapestry of love, fear, and survival. Sarah often sat by the window at night, gazing at the stars and wondering where Emma might be, what life she had lived, what challenges she had faced, and if she had ever felt alone. The community continued to support them, inspired by their courage and unwavering hope. The town's newspaper ran stories about the expanding investigation, keeping Emma's name alive in the public consciousness. Volunteers organized fundraisers to support the search, and local churches held prayer vigils. The sense of shared purpose was a balm to Sarah and Tom's weary hearts. Yet, amidst the growing momentum, there were moments of doubt and exhaustion. The weight of the past 15 years pressed down, and the unknown stretched ahead like a vast, uncharted wilderness. Sarah often found herself questioning how much longer they could hold on to hope. But every time those thoughts crept in, she remembered Emma's bright smile and the promise of reunion. Then, one evening, a phone call shattered the fragile calm. A woman's voice, hesitant but unmistakable, reached out from a distant city. She claimed to have information about Emma, something that could change everything. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as the conversation unfolded, revealing a thread that could finally lead them home. The woman explained that Emma had been living under a different name, protected by those who had cared for her. She was safe but unaware of her true origins, a fact that complicated the reunion but also offered hope for healing. The call set in motion a series of events that would bring Sarah and Tom face to face with a reality they had only dreamed of, a chance to reclaim their daughter and rewrite the final chapters of their long story. As Sarah hung up the phone, tears streaming down her face, she felt a surge of determination unlike any before. The journey was far from over, but the pieces were falling into place. The past, with all its pain and mystery, was giving way to a future filled with the promise of reunion, love, and forgiveness. The days following the phone call passed in a strange, suspended kind of time. Sarah moved through them as if in a dream, each hour stretched tight with anticipation. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, afraid to miss any word, any update. The woman who had called identified herself as Andrea Martin, a caseworker from a shelter in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She'd seen the news about Emma's backpack, the story that had recently made national headlines, and something in the girl who'd been staying at their shelter for nearly 6 months had clicked. Her eyes, her scars, the way she flinched at certain names. Andrea had watched the press conference with Sarah's trembling voice echoing through the screen and felt a sudden, searing certainty. She reached out, not on impulse, but with a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, her hunch was right. Sarah and Tom boarded a flight arranged by the sheriff's office and were met in Santa Fe by Andrea herself. The caseworker was younger than Sarah expected, but her face carried the weight of someone who had seen too much too soon. She led them through narrow streets to a modest building tucked behind a church. The shelter was simple but safe, painted in soft tones, filled with the low murmur of hushed voices and the distant creak of old floorboards. Sarah's heart thudded like a drum in her chest. Her hands trembled as Andrea guided them into a quiet office. "She doesn't remember everything," Andrea said softly, "but she remembers a creak. She remembers hiding. And she remembers a woman named Marlene, who she thought was her mother." The door opened, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The girl who stepped inside was no longer the 5-year-old with pigtails and sparkly shoes from the photographs. She was 17 now, taller than Sarah had imagined, with dark, cautious eyes and long, tangled hair. She looked like someone who had learned to survive, who had stitched herself together in a world that didn't always make room for children. But there was something unmistakable in her face, an echo of the child Sarah had once held in her arms, the curve of her cheek, the set of her jaw, the way her fingers fidgeted at the hem of her sleeve. The girl stood in the doorway, frozen. Sarah rose slowly, her voice caught in her throat. "Emma," she whispered, her eyes flooding with tears. The girl blinked, her lips parting. I don't remember everything," she said cautiously, almost apologetically. "They said my name was Emily, but I have dreams of a green lunchbox, of crayons, of someone singing me a song about stars." Sarah stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." Emma gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth, and the tears came suddenly, like rain through a broken window. She crossed the room in 3 shaky steps, and Sarah caught her in trembling arms. Tom stood back, tears sliding silently down his weathered face as he watched the 2 halves of his life fall into place. They stayed that way for a long time, mother and daughter wrapped around each other, shaking with sobs that came from 15 years of loss and waiting and aching. No words could fill that space, only the silence between them, weighted with memories, both real and imagined, and the presence of something greater than explanation. In the days that followed, Sarah and Tom remained in Santa Fe. They didn't rush things. The staff at the shelter gently guided the process. Emma, who still flinched at sudden noises and woke crying from nightmares, was given time to adjust, to explore the new reality without pressure. Sarah sat with her for hours, showing her photos, singing old lullabies, sharing memories that belonged to both of them. Emma listened, sometimes quietly, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a smile that broke Sarah's heart wide open. She didn't remember everything. Not the day she vanished, not the cave, not the exact moment Marlene brought her into hiding, but she remembered enough. Enough to know that the nightmares were real, that she hadn't imagined the fear, the loneliness. Marlene, she explained in broken fragments, had loved her, but they had always been on the move. She said we had to hide, Emma whispered. She said people would take me away, that I had to forget who I was. Tom, ever patient, joined her on walks around the courtyard, telling her about the town, about the treehouse he'd once built for her in the backyard, about the first time she laughed. Slowly, Emma began to respond, not just with words, but with small gestures. She smiled more. She laughed, awkward and shy. She began drawing again, a habit Sarah remembered from before. The pictures started off dark, caves, shadows, twisted trees, but over time they began to change. A sun appeared, a figure with outstretched arms, a girl standing by a stream. When the shelter's counselors suggested Emma undergo a formal DNA test, Sarah agreed. It was a technicality more than anything. The results came back within days. There was no doubt. She was Emma Porter. She had been all along. Sarah cried when she saw the paper, not because she needed proof, but because she finally held something solid in her hands, something that couldn't vanish. It was the final piece of a puzzle she'd been trying to finish for a decade and a half. And yet, Sarah knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. Healing was not a straight path. There would be therapy, hard days, public curiosity, and the slow rebuilding of trust and identity. But for now, in this small town far from where the story had begun, there was the one thing they had prayed for most. Emma was alive. She was home, in the only way that mattered. The early weeks of Emma's return home were wrapped in both celebration and fragility. The town of Rose Creek, once hollowed by grief, now pulsed with life again. Neighbors dropped off home-cooked meals. Old classmates who had only known Emma through fading posters left notes on the porch. But inside the Porter home, things moved more carefully, like tiptoeing across thin ice, each step unsure of what might crack beneath it. Emma had a room now, her own space filled with soft light and pastel walls, not the unfamiliar hotel beds or sparse shelter cot she had grown used to. Sarah had preserved many of her daughter's childhood things, some faded, some packed away like time capsules, hoping against hope that someday they'd be used again. And now, after all these years, Emma walked among them, touching them gently, as if they might disappear again if she breathed too hard. But there were nights, quiet ones when the air turned thick with memory, that Emma couldn't sleep. The nightmares returned like visitors unwelcome, but familiar. Fragments of the cave, the dampness clinging to her skin, the hiss of wind through stone, Marlene's low voice murmuring bedtime stories with twisted ends. Some memories were clearer now, sharper. Others teased the edges of her mind like ghosts hiding just behind curtain. Tom and Sarah watched her closely. They didn't push, but Emma could feel it, the need for answers. Not from anger, but from aching love, from years of not knowing, of wandering through darkness with only questions for company. One afternoon, while Sarah folded laundry and the autumn sun spilled gold across the wooden floors, Emma stood in the doorway. "I want to go back," she said simply. Sarah paused, a sheet half folded in her hands. "Go back where, sweetheart?" "To the cave." It was said without hesitation, not with fear, but determination. Something in her voice had changed. She didn't just want to remember. She needed to. She needed to see where the silence had begun. Sheriff Watkins was cautious but supportive. He arranged for a small, private visit. No media, no outsiders. Just Emma, Sarah, Tom, and Deputy Karen Langley, who had become like a quiet guardian since Emma's return. The path to the cave was harder than Sarah remembered. The trail had overgrown in places, the woods thicker, less forgiving. But Emma walked ahead, sure-footed, her gaze steady. When they reached the entrance, she stood still for a long moment, eyes narrowed, as if measuring something invisible. Then, without a word, she stepped inside. The air turned colder, thinner. The beam of the flashlight danced over rocks and moss, carving out long shadows. Emma's steps slowed near the narrow corridor that had once been too small for rescuers to explore. Now, thinner and older, she ducked low and moved forward, her hand brushing the damp wall. Sarah followed, breath tight, heart pounding. When Emma stopped abruptly, Sarah nearly bumped into her. "This is it," Emma whispered. "This is where she kept me." There was no need for a full confession. The way Emma's eyes roamed the space, the way her fingers traced the grooves in the wall, it was all memory now. She crouched beside a hollowed-out niche, once filled with blankets and coloring books, now scattered with dust and time. Her voice cracked. "I used to count the rocks to know when it was morning. Marlene said the sun would never find us if we stayed hidden." Sarah knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her daughter's trembling shoulders. "You were never meant to be hidden," she said softly. They sat there for what felt like hours, the only sound the distant drip of water and the quiet ache of recollection. Emma talked then, really talked. She spoke of the first few weeks after she vanished, of how Marlene had taken her in like a scared stray, weaving a tale of false motherhood and secret dangers. "She told me people would hurt me, that the world was full of liars, that I didn't have anyone but her." Tom listened from the cave's entrance, his eyes shining in the dim light. He didn't interrupt. He knew this moment belonged to Emma, that no comfort would come from denial, only from truth. "I didn't know my name for a long time," Emma continued, eyes distant. "She called me Lily. I stopped asking questions after a while. When I did, she'd get this look, and I'd remember not to." Sarah's tears came then, not from shock, but from grief for all the stolen years, all the silences, all the days she'd wondered if her daughter was alive, if she was cold or hungry, or crying out for her in the dark. "She didn't hurt me. Not really. But she didn't love me either. Not like you did," Emma whispered. Back outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting the forest in amber light. Emma looked back at the cave once, just once, then turned away. "I'm done with the shadows," she said. On the way home, they didn't speak much, but the silence was different now. It was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was a silence that understood, that bore witness. That night, Emma wrote for the first time in a journal Sarah had placed by her bedside weeks before. The first line read, "I remembered who I am today. Not everything, but enough to begin." It had been 3 months since Emma came back from the cave, but the real journey, the one no one could see, was only just beginning. Her days were filled with gentle routines now, each one a thread helping stitch her life back together. Mornings began with the sound of birds outside her window and the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Tom would hum old tunes while flipping pancakes. Sarah tended her garden with a quiet joy, always clipping a flower or two to place on the table where Emma could see them. In many ways, their lives resembled the normal they had once taken for granted, but it was a new normal, woven through with memory and healing, not the naive ease of before. Emma enrolled in an adult education program at the local college, starting with a creative writing course. At first, she barely spoke in class, unsure how to place herself in a world that had raced forward without her. But with each assignment, she found her voice, a quiet, resonant strength that surprised even her. Her first story was about a girl who lived in a cave and believed the stars were just the eyes of people she once knew, watching over her. Her professor, a woman with weathered hands and kind eyes, returned it with a note in the margin. "You don't just write, you remember in poetry." The town rallied around Emma, cautiously but sincerely. The whispers and stares faded with time, replaced by warm greetings at the market and neighbors asking about her classes. Children smiled at her, wide-eyed and curious, and she no longer turned away. Sometimes, parents brought them over to say hello, to remind them that this was the same girl who had once stood in that schoolyard waiting for her mother, clutching a pink backpack, bright as a spring blossom. And Sarah, she had learned to exhale again. There were still nights when she would wake up and check on Emma, just to be sure. Sometimes she'd find her daughter asleep with a notebook on her chest, pen still in hand, her face peaceful in a way that was unfamiliar but beautiful. Tom, too, found comfort in the rhythm of life returning. He built Emma a reading nook by the window, complete with cushions, a tiny bookshelf, and fairy lights. It wasn't much, but when she curled up there with her journal, the look in her eyes told him it meant the world. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Emma asked if she could speak at the church service. Pastor Whitmore, who had once baptized her as a baby, agreed without hesitation. The congregation had filled every pew, not out of curiosity, but love. When Emma stood at the pulpit, her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "I don't remember everything," she began, her eyes scanning the familiar faces, "and I probably never will. But what I do remember, what I've come to know, is that I was loved. Even in the darkest places, some part of me remembered that. I think that's what saved me. Not the cave, not the woman who took me, but the love I was given before I was taken, and the love that never stopped waiting for me." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Some cried softly, others bowed their heads in reverence. When she stepped down, Sarah hugged her in front of everyone, and no one looked away. Life moved on in seasons. Emma's hair grew longer, her laugh came easier, and her writing deepened. She submitted a short story to a national contest, and, to her astonishment, won third place. The piece was titled "When the Forest Breathes," and it was about a girl who left the dark behind by learning to breathe again. But the moment that marked her true return home came quietly, without fanfare. It was the eve of what would have been her 21st birthday. Sarah had made a simple dinner: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with garlic, just the way Emma remembered from childhood. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, each moment. When dessert came, a homemade strawberry cake, Emma lit the candles herself. There were no balloons, no large gathering, just the three of them and the flicker of candlelight. Before blowing out the candles, Emma closed her eyes for a long time. When she opened them, tears shimmered on her lashes. "I'm glad I came back," she whispered. "I'm glad I found my way." Sarah reached across the table and took her hand, and Tom placed his over both of theirs. "You never stopped being ours," he said, voice husky with emotion. "Even when the world didn't know where you were, we did. In here." He touched his chest. "Always." Outside, the wind carried the soft hum of spring returning. The lilac bushes swayed gently, the stars above blinking through thin clouds like sentinels. Emma stepped out onto the porch later that night, wrapping herself in a shawl Sarah had knit years ago. She looked up at the sky, breathing in the cool air, her heart calm. She didn't feel like the girl who had vanished anymore. That girl had been frightened, small, unsure of what was true. The woman she had become, one step at a time, was something else entirely. Not healed, not whole, but no longer lost. And deep inside, she knew the cave would always be there. A place of darkness, of quiet, of stolen years, but no longer held power over her. It was part of her story, not the end of it. From behind, she heard Sarah's voice, soft as a lullaby. "Come inside, sweetheart. It's getting cold." Emma smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Okay, Mama," she said. And with that, she turned from the night and stepped back into the warm light of home, this time for good. And so, Emma's journey, marked by heartbreak, silence, discovery, and healing, comes full circle. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet moments, soft lights, and love that never gave up. In a world where so many stories end without answers, this one reminds us, even in the darkest places, hope can still take root, and sometimes it even finds its way home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Whether you've been here since part one or just join along the way, your time, your attention, and your heart mean the world to us. These long-form stories are crafted with care and love, especially for listeners like you, who appreciate depth, emotion, and a story worth staying for. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply kept you company, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment below. Share your thoughts, your feelings, or even your own story, because this space isn't just for storytelling, it's for connection. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and your words remind us why we tell them. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and never stop believing in the quiet strength of the human heart. We'll see you in the next story.